Dear beautiful people, let's have some fun. Let's talk about the devil. The devil. What an archetype. Makes a lot of people very, very uncomfortable to talk about, right? Especially those who have an attachment to safety. The need to belong to a particular group or circle. Where they feel that their very existence is only protected if they follow certain rules or certain type of behavior. Well, it is said with the devil comes perversion, right? It's the Antichrist, it's the inversion of the Christ, the perverting of the teaching. The interesting thing about this archetype is to understand that the perversion is already there. And it's being sold to you as the Christ. You see? Group behavior is being sold to you as the Christ. Obedience is being sold to you as the Christ. To worship a God outside of you and to have a Messiah who was special, not like you, right? Because if a Messiah is special, what he did cannot be attained, you see. Makes you feel little. I'm just a mortal human being. I cannot attain enlightenment, right? That's the story. That's the whole story of the Catholic Church. You're a sinner. You're a sinner. Therefore you cannot attain enlightenment. And interestingly, in the Catholic Church, there are certain mechanisms in place that prevent you from actually developing a true mystical practice. Making you feel guilty about sex, for example. What is sexual energy? It's creation. When two human beings have sex, they create another form, which another soul, in that sense, then starts animating. That's creation. That's creative force. And you're being told that's evil. You're also being told that when you speak about freedom, that you're actually promoting anarchy. You're being told that when you express yourself authentically, that it is perversion. Because it threatens the paradigm. It threatens this thought matrix that many are attached to. I remember that one time I had a little chat online with someone who was very intense into the Christian faith, and when I said I don't believe in sin, and he said, "What? You're not a sinner?" And he felt outright offended by that. I said, "I'm not a sinner." It was so threatening to his ego. The idea that someone could love himself. The whole idea about being a sinner, and about needing the herd, and about needing a shepherd, and about needing all of that, is all about giving up your own intelligence. It's all about not asking questions. You see, the moment you ask a question, there's something wrong with you. You need some help, maybe some medication. Don't be curious, you see. Curiosity is not rewarded, right? Curiosity is shamed. So what is the Antichrist then? Well, everything that is not Christ, obviously. Well, what's Christ then? Buddha consciousness. What is Buddha consciousness? Or Christ consciousness? It is the dimension of love. The recognition of interrelatedness between all living beings, all things, everything in nature. To realize the oneness, not the separateness. But interestingly, in most religions, separateness is being preached. It's a little bit paradox, isn't it? You want to be one with your Creator, be separate from anything else. Oh, you actually are not allowed to be one with your Creator, because He's separate, you see. Separate from you, that's what they tell you. Right? It's not within your heart. So the Antichrist is the perversion of truth, isn't it? It's not an archetypal figure. It's not the devil knocking on your door. That's not what it is. Everything that leads you to freedom has been labeled sin. Sexuality, right? Free expression of it has been labeled sin. Experimenting with psychedelic substances to enhance your consciousness has been labeled sin. Some Christians, when they're really conservative, they even say, don't meditate, it invites the devil. You see, everything that actually works, it's being called perversion. Then you had this eerie sense that when you were a child, you knew something? But then there were all those grown-ups around you, and they said your intuitive sense is wrong. And at some point you started believing them. You see, that's the perversion, that's the Antichrist being instilled into your brain. Your intuitive sense as a child, your spiritual sense, was blocked. And in place of that was put the ego. Identity was being put there, right? Not union, not oneness, but identity, and identity creates separation. This is what happened. So, we say we live in a democracy, right? At least in Germany we say that, right? You might say it in whatever country you live. Hopefully it is a democracy. I don't know where you live. All right. But interesting, every time we ask the tough questions, there's backlash. When you look into your heart, can you go outside and express yourself freely? Really express yourself freely? If you had no filter, no censor whatsoever. If you would post your most inner, deepest thoughts on social media, if you're nervous about it, if you're afraid about it, we don't live in a free world. There's a reason you're afraid about it. Because as that child, with that intuitive sense, you knew something was off. In a society of mass hallucination, the canary in the gold mine is being diagnosed with schizophrenia. Most doctors don't even know what schizophrenia is. It's the opening of spiritual channels. It only looks to them as mental illness because once those channels open, they get in conflict with the ego, or let's say the ego tries to suppress them, and suddenly they fall into psychosis. And then we give them antipsychotics which block the chakras. We say, hey, you're healed. Instead of helping you integrating all the soul energy that you then feel as the shadow and have labeled as the devil. Because it comes in and it starts taking away your sense of separateness. And suddenly the ego gets very scared. You've been identified with the ego for such a long time. And you run to a doctor, doctor, I feel helpless, please turn this off. Please turn off my ability to hear voices, to experience telepathy, to have visions. Please turn it off. Please turn off my enhanced perception. Because I have been used to believe I'm a tiny, tiny person which consists of memory and just that. So what is the Antichrist here? The Antichrist is a society that is anti-awakening. And we have let's say, we have a lot of mechanisms in place to make sure that someone doesn't wake up. We diagnose them with various labels, right? But again, they are the canary in the coal mine. Those who are actually sensitive enough to respond to the madness are the ones who are closer to realizing Christ's consciousness than those who have numbed themselves. And those sensitive, they ask the uncomfortable questions. They're curious. They want to know. They had this sense something was buried in their childhood, right? It's just a vague memory. So they say, the way your society is meaningless. So I feel like suiciding. He's speaking of the devil. You can't suicide. The last freedom that exists of a human being, to live or not to live, is being denied. You have to obey. Oh, I'm walking a very dangerous territory right now with someone with a psychotherapy license. Speaking about suicide like that. You see, I want to be very honest about that. I had to make a cut there. Had to cut the video to reflect on what I'm about to say next. Because yes, when you work as a counselor in some sort of psychotherapy role, you walk on very, very thin ice speaking about suicide. What does that tell you? That I need to be careful about what I will say about the topic of suicide. It means even in psychotherapy there's a paradigm. There's the paradigm of emphasizing the survival of the material body over everything. To the point where we need to force someone to enter a psychiatric hospital against their will. Well, yes, we could say that in the moment where they're suffering greatly, that they're not in a conscious state and they struggle to make conscious decisions, that is correct. So we try to protect them from making unconscious decisions. That's a kind thing to do. But does that justify taking away freedom? You're not allowed to kill yourselves because you are part of a system. You're not to remove a cog from the machine. So we have shamed the very last freedom someone has to be or not to be, as Shakespeare said it. I would choose to be. I would choose to be because to be there for those in need. Still, I'm walking on thin ice here. And maybe that is why it's very important to do that right now. To walk on thin ice so others might be inspired to walk on thin ice as well. Because every time we feel there's something we cannot talk about because there's some sort of conditioning, some sort of block instilled in us, some sort of taboo that was created. We're thinking the one who wants to kill himself is flawed. That's not the case. That something isn't functioning right. Many of them are just sensitive enough to understand what type of society we live in, and they choose not to. Can we transform this society? Of course we can. And I would encourage everyone to transform themselves so the society is transformed. But the very nervousness that we feel when speaking about a certain topic means that we're unfree. That the programs that have been put into our brains do not allow us to speak freely about something. Because it endangers a paradigm, a structure. So what is the Antichrist then? The Antichrist is a collective program put into your head to prevent self-exploration, which would finally lead to self-realization and therefore to freedom. The Antichrist is a program in the mind to keep you unfree. And since nobody could sell that to you, if you would be there and awake in the moment, you would be like, of course I don't want that. They need to sell it to you in a different way. They say it's reasonable, it will keep you safe, it will help you plan your future, and so on and so on. We have given it many, many positive labels. These are actually labels of avoidance. What is planning for the future? It's avoiding the present moment. It is avoiding awakening right now to the eternity. Right? So we have given the behavior of avoidance many, many so-called positive terms. You know. To avoid means to be unfree. Because to avoid something I need to compulsively ignore it. I need to not explore. So exploration is not encouraged. So the Antichrist is anti-freedom, anti-expression, anti-liberty. Right? But we have labeled it Christ. Because otherwise we would rebel against it. So we have labeled what puts us caged, what keeps us caged, we have labeled it good. We live in a society where when someone is waking up to the fear and anxiety in this system, to the cruelty, and they realize it, that we medicate them back asleep. Because their very presence scares our egos. Because we still think by being obedient we can get somewhere. We still think by submitting to the paradigm, to the system, we can get somewhere. But we're in self-denial. We don't even want to question the most powerful phenomenon, that is death. Our egos are so afraid of that, you see, because we have been programmed to fear death. During the spiritual process, we learn to face death. There are monks who would meditate in a morgue or would watch the bodies rot in the plains of Tibet. To see beyond the illusion of matter and form. But in the West we want to preserve matter and form at all costs because we identify with it and therefore have created evil. So we say you gotta be attached to your form no matter what. You gotta be very anxious about that. But isn't the path to realization to be ultimately liberated from form? Liberated from limitation itself? Instead, we offer you to reprogram you, to re-socialize you, so you can have a regular job, so you can fit in. But fitting in was never the point. Something you wanted to rebel. And because it wasn't allowed to rebel, depression was born. Various mental illnesses were born. But all those mental illnesses come from the suppression of soul energy. But we can't say that. It's unscientific. It's not proven yet. What's not proven yet doesn't exist. Say the materialists. To keep someone trapped at all costs because we are afraid of death. That the psychiatrist who boxes in a person hides his own fear of death under the disguise of goodness and says, I'm helping this person. But he doesn't know what death is. That death is not the end of awareness, of life. It's just a transition. At no point in time would I encourage anyone to commit suicide. There's a reason for this. Because karma needs to be worked out. And karma that you don't work out right now, you work it out at another time, in another place, but still the same karma. So, killing the form does liberate you from it. And actually, it's not about killing the form. Most people, when they're deeply depressed, what they actually want, they want to kill the ego. They just don't know any other way to do it but by ending the body. This is where spiritual practice comes in. Because when we transform the body, we undo the limitations of the conditioning and therefore realize freedom. And then living life is wondrous and amazing. But it needs the acknowledgement first that it is about more than just being successful or not being successful in life. It's about more than survival. It's about more than saving for your retirement. We've been told these stories in school. You got to save for your retirement. You got to be successful. But many of us didn't feel like it. But at some point we played along. We played along because the pressure got so big. So the soul energy of the inner artist, the inner writer, the inner investigator, maybe you had a scientist in you, or whatever you had in you when you were a child, where you intuitively knew something, was boxed in by a conceptual fake self that we call the ego. And this ego is trained to believe that by obedience it can achieve something. Nothing can be achieved by obedience, by submission. Nothing. But many who experience mental illness, they figured out very quickly, if I'm nice to the doctors, if I tell them what I want to tell them, I'll be protected by the system. So now they have an ego of mental illness and don't want to let that go because it protects them from the system, you see. All mental illness is a lack of soul expression, a lack of following soul energy. Because what is the opposite of depression? That is expression. If we do not express ourselves authentically, that means we are unfree. And if you feel afraid to tell, for example, some family members something, or the pastor in the church, or professor in the university, then you are afraid because you believe in the behavior of dominance and submission, that there's someone who is in a position of authority, and they ultimately choose where you go in life. And that belief is self-disempowering. To be awake means to choose sovereignty, to choose freedom, to choose choice itself. To live life consciously, awake in the present moment, not attached to outcome, but truthfully. And our authentic selves have been locked away. Because if we would all be our authentic self, the system as it is would not survive. And that's a very good thing. Contemplate about that, my friends. Be well.